Okay. Right. As you know, I made a little last-minute change to this because, unfortunately, John Dalton had to go to a meeting this afternoon. But to be honest, it quite suits me because I normally would talk to you quite early on anyway. Now, I'm the module leader for this module. I teach some of it. I probably teach more than anybody else on it. And I organise the exam as well, which I've been actually writing the exam this afternoon. You'll be pleased to know. I know this is teeny weeny writing, but could you just pass this round and tick your name? Can you actually see it? I know it's tiny. Just so I can see who's here.
We should tick it.
Yeah, just tick it. So what I thought we'd do this afternoon is I'm going to talk to you about what I'm going to discuss in my lectures, and probably in total I think I do about 6 hours for you. And rather than talk to you for an hour, I'm going to talk to you for a little while, and then I'm going to make you do some work, which is probably more interesting. And it also is going to enable me, from having a look at what you've done later on, to see what you know and what you don't know. Right, where is the lecture I've just been playing with? This is it. Okay. So obviously today, because I'm giving you a piece of work to do, I am not I didn't put the notes on Blackboard, because otherwise the answers would be on Blackboard, which would be a bit pointless. So this is me. I've been in the university 33 years. Yeah, I know, it's awful, isn't it? Actually, I've been here longer than that because I did my MSc here and I did my PhD here as well. I'm not an engineer really. I did biology, then I did civil engineering, then I did environmental engineering, and now I'm based in chemical engineering. So I've been there, I've been everywhere. I know a lot about the environment. I don't know anything about pipelines, but I know a lot about the environment. I know a lot about sustainability. So, what are we going to talk about in my lectures? I'm going to talk about today a little overview of sustainable development and a bit about the environmental impacts of pipelines, and then we'll do an exercise. On Wednesday, John Dalton is going to give the lecture he would have given you today, and the second hour, which will be from 12 till 1 on Wednesday, we're going to go through what you've done today. So I'll give you some of the answers, but also hopefully you will have come up with better ideas than me, so we can feed that into my lecture. Another time I'm going to talk to you about environmental and social governance risk, or what we call ESG risk. We're going to do environmental management systems and ISO 14001. Have any of you heard of environmental management systems? Some of you? Yes. I've got a consultant coming in to talk to you about EIA, environmental impact assessment. And then if we have time, I'm going to do a pipeline routing exercise with you. So that's what we're going to cover in my lectures. So, sustainable development. Don't you get really sick of everybody talking about sustainability and sustainable development? And I mean, in the past, you'd Google it and there'd be sort of 500 hits. Now you Google it and there's like billions of hits, and everybody's talking about something being sustainable. Sustainability has got three aspects: the environment, social aspects, and financial aspects. Which one do you think companies care about the most? The money. They are there to make money, particularly oil and gas sector making money. Which one do you think they think about second?
Social.
Do you? I would say mostly environment. Well, it depends which country you're in. If you're in a country where there's a lot of legislation, they will be thinking about the environment because they have to. And often, most companies, not just oil and gas, most companies forget about people, forget about social aspects until something terrible goes wrong and they realise actually they made a big mistake and they should have considered all their stakeholders. We call it the three-legged stool because what happens if you break one leg of a three-legged stool, it falls over. So why should the pipeline sector care? Because it wants to be there for the long term. If you think about most oil and gas companies, you know, Shell, BP, they've been there for donkey's years, haven't they? And they're hoping they're going to be there for another few donkey's years. So they're thinking long-term strategic planning. Legislation varies with country now. We know now that everybody is very international. In this country, we have a lot of legislation. We've got maybe 500 European directives which are feeding into environmental legislation in this country. Is anybody from this country? No. Well, I can tell you, in this country we are quite well behaved, and if we have legislation, we follow it. Mostly. We follow it pretty well. In other countries, you may not have legislation. Does anyone come from a country with no legislation? I've had students in the past from certain countries, and they've said to me, we just don't do environmental legislation. You can do what you want. There are other countries, which probably some of you do come from, but you don't have to admit it, where you have environmental legislation, but you don't have to follow it because you can just give somebody some money or just ignore it, because there are no consequences. It can save you money. Believe me, if you take a proactive view towards legislation and also towards communicating with stakeholders and thinking about what they might get upset about and doing something about it first, it will save you money long term. You won't end up being embarrassed. You won't end up being in the newspapers, big scandal such and such has happened. And the need to avoid bad public relations. And I run an MSc called Clean Technology, and I teach mostly on an MSc called Sustainable Chemical Engineering. And I talk a lot about different companies. And as it happens, a lot of the examples I give of companies who have communicated very badly with stakeholders are the oil and gas sector. Because in the past, they just haven't done a good job. They've tended to kind of, instead of discussing, they've just said, we're going to do this, and then everybody's complained about it, and then they've had to try and defend themselves and get round it. So, you want to avoid risk. So how does the sector affect sustainable development? Well, obviously, it is maybe extracting raw materials, it's moving raw materials, it is providing energy, it's moving energy, it might be moving water, moving intermediate chemicals. Through how it operates, has it got an environmental management system? How does it treat its employees? How does it treat its suppliers? How does it treat its customers? The people it contracts, does it even know who's working for it? And through what it discharges to air, to water, to land, either legally with a permit or illegally because you're a naughty company, and the impact that it has on biodiversity and resources. And finally, how it deals with stakeholders. Now, who are company stakeholders? Give me some examples of a company's stakeholders. Customers? Employees? Shareholders? People who are lending them money? The media? People that live nearby? It might be if there's an explosion, they're going to get affected. Yeah? non-governmental organisations who might not like them, who might be the regulators. Lots and lots of different people are stakeholders. We'll talk about this more when we do ESG. And also its ethical stance. And also the effect it has on the economy. So, assessing a pipeline through its life cycle, and this is what we're going to do this afternoon. You're going to do in a minute. You can use it to transport many different things. Now, I suppose mostly in this course you talk about moving oil and gas, do you, rather than water? But I mean, you can move water, you can move sewage. If you're a chemical plant, you may be moving chemical intermediaries between one part of the site and another. There's lots of different chemicals you could be moving. And you may be using different types of pipeline material. So life cycle assessment is something that is quite widely used now, and it's important that you remember that it's about the environment. It's not a sustainability assessment. Life cycle assessment is about looking at a product or a service. So it may be a pipeline, or it may be the function that a pipeline has, and saying, what are its impacts, its environmental impacts, in terms of the raw materials, how these are manufactured, how it's used, how it's disposed of, or how it's decommissioned at the end of its life. And as I say, this is not about sustainability, it's about environmental impacts. So, some examples of environmental impacts. What is an important environmental problem we might be trying to avoid? Environmental problems? Global warming, pollution, ecotoxicity, acidification, eutrophication. These are all environmental problems. The one that most people talk about is usually greenhouse gases. Ozone depletion, that's another one. So this is what a life cycle assessment is looking at. Also, loss of biodiversity, noise, vibration, impacts of vibration on the sea. Did you see those poor pilot whales that all got stranded in Scotland on the news the other day? And you want to see that? It's so sad. 400 pilot whales got stranded, and they think it could be something to do with undersea excavations and some sort of acoustic impacts. There's a new thing come out now called social LCA, bless you, and social LCA goes beyond the environment, and it also looks on impacts on people. So it looks at things like impacts on human health, impacts on employment, but it's still very much in its infancy. Although we've done quite a lot on LCA. I mean, when I started lecturing, LCA wasn't very common at all. Now everybody's doing LCA. So if you...
What's LCA?
Life cycle assessment. Life cycle assessment. So if you look at the life cycle of a pipeline, sorry this isn't the world's most clear slide, but you have the idea of what you want to do. And you will write it down, you'll put in a planning application, you will probably then have to do an environmental impact assessment, you will have to consult with potential stakeholders, there may be a public hearing, normally there would be, the stakeholders get a chance to put their opinions in, you may change your project slightly, then it goes into the construction stage, and it goes through various inspections and audits, and then it starts working. And it's going to work for however long it works for. Typically, how long does the pipeline stay in for? How long does it last? 15, 20 years. Although, often they don't get taken away at the end, do they? They just get left.
Question regarding this public hearing, what's the requirement for this? It's like they say about the plan and they will sign off.
Yeah.
Agree.
What happens if, when you do EIA, we'll talk about this more, if you are applying for any major project, not just a pipeline, say an airport, big housing development, anything, you have to put in an environmental impact assessment. And you have to say, this is the project as it is. This is the potential impact it's going to have on people and the environment and amenity and transport links and infrastructure. And this is what we are doing to make sure it doesn't have a big impact. So you have to show what mitigation you're putting in place to prevent it causing a big damage. People have then got the right to see what you've said and either to say, yeah, fantastic, great, or actually we don't believe this and we think it would be better if you did this, this, this. So it's a sort of iterative process that goes backwards and forwards. And eventually you may or you may not get planning permission. And in this country, if it's refused, it can go all the way to the Secretary of State.
Okay, this public hearing, it's like an agreement between the social and the company.
It's more a public. You may not have to have a public hearing, but if you do, it is a case of the public are invited to go and put their case to the company.
Yeah,
and say,
I know, but
yeah.
Is there some requirement like signing the contract or giving some, for example, permission to work?
Yeah, it is planning permission. I mean, in this country, it's called planning permission. Yeah. And then you get planning permission, and if you can do it, you can do it. And you'll get it also for things like wind farms, well, any big infrastructure, yeah? So, and then at the end of its life, you may just leave it, or you may decide to take it out. And you may decide to recycle it. So there's going to be impacts at each stage, yeah? So, when we are carrying out an LCA, we will look at each stage. We will look at raw materials extraction, manufacture, installation, use and decommissioning. Where, as I said, it may just sit there or it may get disposed of or it may get recycled. And at each stage we've got raw materials going in, we've got gas, we've got electricity, we've got waste coming out, we've got emissions to air, we've got potential contamination of soil, we've got effluent, we've got impacts on biodiversity, impacts on landscape, noise, vibration. And what life cycle assessment tries to do is it tries to look at each stage and look at what the major environmental impacts are at each stage, so that you can summarise them at the end. I actually teach an entire module on LCA, so I'm giving you LCA in like 2 minutes. So don't get hung up on what LCA is about, just understand the basics of it. So, as I say, for each stage in the life cycle, you will have utilities, raw materials going in, impacts on ecosystems, air, water, land, noise, vibration. And you will have to try to quantify these, and I mean actually quantify them in terms of hard data. Now we have a lot of software that can do LCAs for you, which makes it a bit easier. So, you should think about the materials that you're using. So what can we make a pipeline out of? Steel, plastics, reinforced fiberglass, concrete. No. The actual fabrication process of how you make it, and then how you install it, and how you stick it together, and the other bits and pieces that you may need, like transformers and things, the operation of it, and at the end of its life, doing whatever you're going to do with it to decommission it. So, now you're going to work in groups. I would suggest there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 17, 18 of you. So work in groups of 4 or 5. Okay, so let's have you as a group. Let's have you as a group.
Let's do it in a row.
Yes, you can get together, sit so you can talk to each other. Yeah? So get up, we'll move towards each other. One, two, you four work together, and you five work together. Okay? So you need to go sit together and play on your phone. We are here for lecture, we are not here playing. Right, so get together and you are going to hand this in, okay? So you need to write it down. Why are you here?
He wants to learn.
So, you will need a piece of paper, yeah? You will need a piece of paper, you will need to put your names on the piece of paper. When you finish writing this down, you are going to hand this in to reception, chemical engineering reception, which is on the 3rd floor. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to pick it up and look at it and be well impressed by what you've done. You are not going to cheat. You are not going to go on the internet. You are going to use your brains. Okay? And what we're looking at is, remember, each stage, so try to be logical in how you're writing it down. Raw materials, fabrication, installation, use, and commissioning or analysis. At each stage, what are the environmental impacts? What are the economic consequences? And they can be good things, they can be bad things. And what are the societal impacts? What are the impacts that people are going to have? Yeah? Now, I'm going to stay with you for 5 minutes, and then I'm going to leave you. You have to spend at least 20 minutes doing this. You cannot run away. So you stay here for 20 minutes, you do it, and then you hand it in, and I'm going to pick it up tomorrow.
Are you going to market?
I'm not going to mark it, but I'm going to tell you which group did the best. So you will be embarrassed if you're not top. Okay?
So, there was actually one tip, like a slide. Was this one? There was a previous slide.
Do you want the previous slide? Yeah. Do you want that slide? Is that
this slide.
that slide?
Raw material. I think there was with box somewhere.
Yeah, the one with the boxes. That was very much. That was just the environment. That was looking at what was going in. Yeah. Materials, utilities, what was coming out, impacts on ecosystems, noise, vibration, air, water, land. Yeah? And hopefully some of you have got experience in pipelines, so you will know more than me. So you are going to be so much better than my answers on Wednesday. And you can tell me terrible stories, that's great. Right. Okay. Right, who wants the slide of the task back again? So you remember what's on there, yeah? Yeah? Right. Okay. That's a good idea, thank you. So are you actually going to do this? No.
Example.
Always you are asking questions. What are the things that's cost on?
Reaching people's pockets.
Transportation here somewhere. Transporting material, we can if you are transporting causing a traffic.
Big picture, man. Show them your side. What? Is that major? It's not regular. When you see one place, because you really feel so it's air pollution, we use it all for the you put that in our list. How?
You might get energy intensive and for others.
We are thinking about material selection and which material.
Aluminium. Concrete, very energy intensive. As a material, very and where do you get the basic raw materials from? You get them locally. So that's within farm actually.
It should be local environment.
I mean, obviously you want to use the optimum material. You don't want to choose a material on the environmental grounds and then find out everything leaks out or it doesn't last longer than 5 minutes. Well, they might leach out chemicals into the ground, yeah. Right, okay.
Yes.
Good. She's got this
You don't have time to just okay. The point she said, concrete, high energy.
Okay, are you happy with what you're doing? Can I leave you? Okay. You will promise me that you will hand it in and you will put your names on it, hand it in to the general office, and tomorrow I'm going to put it in. That's true. And I'll see you on Wednesday.
And if there is a leakage,
I don't care what they say. Yeah? Okay.
while manufacturing, there are defects and they can later stages they can of the manufacturing defects. The shipment, The scrap, they go and throw it on the side. Material scrap. So it comes in decommission. In manufacturing stage, whatever scrap you get from manufacturing nowadays they don't, but it can be some people. In some countries they don't follow legislation. Defects and defects of manufacturing.
Yeah, and for the decommissioning, so there is decommissioning.
Yeah, that's so scrap, just
The wastage or wastage.
What about social impact?
I would try to minimize the cost. That's what shouldn't be allowed. Should be disposed properly.
So it's really interesting for damage, like, so hard. You know, when you fantastic. It's like,
And it goes around. Not strong.
For example, for the material, you may choose like cheaper materials like instead of high grade, you will choose the cheapest one.
I mean, they can make noise. They'll be unhappy. They'll be unhappy, but yeah, but so design doesn't affect. Like, let's say, okay, let's say you design the volume, how the design your
maybe we need to like the whole the economics of importance or making it existence or whatever. What is the economic implication of that? Again, so
It's not about
You have to choose analysis.
it's enough. It's not one.
Yeah, for environment, it's okay.
Using a special manufacturing process to produce high-grade steel and reheating is expensive.
Yeah, because it's in energy consumption.
building is transmission lines from one country.
Process.
You're paying tax. So you can make it
When they are trying to build inside patterns, transmission patterns.
I think not so much. Yeah, because you're not actually doing it. Rather than design it myself.
From one city to another, it's moreover, it's international vending machines provide gas for you to export services of everything.
In design stage, we have what we call the economic impact. For example, in design stage,
Okay, using and if you don't consider it, becomes one it becomes transport.
Come on.
this is not final. This is not final. Yeah, don't worry.
This also includes cost.
Okay.
Having excessive storage in that was disposal of scrap. Talking about excessive, like you manufacture and there is no demand for it. That's a cost issue. Like if you have to follow GMT.
This is economic impact. Measuring Jensen,
How do you
Scrap.
it depends where are you building. It's true. Because we have class 1 or class 4.
May have a negative point. Okay, just put it in some other way. Economic like first we thought said that it harms society and you don't dispose it properly. But in the case of cost, how can you talk?
Small difference. One thing is good inside the beginning outside.
This is just an economic spend more than and then
Resistance.
Yes.
Chronic remission. we're applying it.
And not include your
How to do routine and routine.
one additional
Special services.
Okay, at least it's not fine. Yeah, but it's just we need to know, we need to apply for it. Otherwise, it's similar. We have to assess it. Same color. No, the same. Okay, even the weights are rating. Okay, we have 5. No. I don't want to in my plan. Yeah, I mean, let me know. That was no major question. I like no major. Really strong. No major. I'm not sure. He's adding station. No major. No major. What's the question? Ask us transport. Yeah, the first question. Major. I use with this for then what else? Restriction. Parameters. So finish thing. That's it. Construction, copy construction, verification, verification. Step looking at right time, name of the I don't think we want to do legal applications, name of the functioning, all that one. So we can do everything. Construction, and that's what we maybe limit our number of people to 4 or 5 minutes. I wonder if we have to. This thing is construction and manufacturing. It's the same thing. But the same construction manufacturing. I mean, this one is the. Yeah. It's so technical. Yeah. This also defining material equation application. We can use that. First one is material such as it can be line height, can be fittings voltage, only power line height. Yeah, fittings everything. Because we manufacturing of line height, manufacturing of fittings. Okay, think about bone plant material. This besides the whole plant is line height. How we can exercise in economic concern. Maybe I'm just this is one of the largest parts of the spec. The largest in terms of your project now. So if you want to work with that's 30, 40 minutes. You know they were out.
That goes under construction.
I sort of.
In order to get excessive mining, in order to get the material, first you will do the mining stage, and in that case, there will be construction work going on. Okay, that is excessive mining
For the
or obtaining the raw materials. It might cause unnecessary disturbances around the residents.
How each stage? How each stage?
Environmental. So, for example, teacher, don't go yeah, we are not going to manufacturing lifestyle. When you are manufacturing,
I think go down, but let it go up.
That's what I'm saying. We should not be doing that. We should be manufacturing offline. How it affects when you are manufacturing heating, you are very emissions when you got mass spread. So like this. So this I'd say it's environmental. It does yes.
So you see how on-site very serious. Pipeline.
Fabrication is manufacturing process.
So pipeline.
Try the same again.
How design had the
Even just
Energy requirement for building
lot of noise, excessive noise.
we never talked about building causes. Or we do it right on the field also, it should be fine. That's also another way. Noise issues.
limiting factor in your construction for the work.
It's not proven. Yeah.
How the connecting rate but itself by itself, don't look deeper, don't go to the left, just take if for instance you say okay, say for example, air pollution due to the gas come out from the
That's you. That is during installation. If in operation gas comes out. So we are just placing there is operation stage also. Gas is coming out by being
okay.
Let's say that air pollution, you disturb the environment, for example. There might be the white animals going around carrying coming to the truck street.
cutting down trees for preparing the
What happened? You disturb now.
Guys, I think some people have lectures here.
Yeah.
So I think we need to move on.
go and rest the place outside.
Go home.
Guys, let's just go straight to the point. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So you can spend just hours.
So if you could set it up here, and then I can reach the visualizer.